Hi, my name is Nick. I have an idea for a story. I want to be a writer, and this is where I'm writing. And this is where I have been during the lockdown. So here I am on about day 22 of level 4 coronavirus lockdown since the 25th of March. I think it's about day 22. Currently, there's something like 1,000 or so cases in New Zealand, 9 deaths. I saw a report on CNN a while ago, which made me quite proud to be a New Zealander, and it was quite, praiseworthy of Jacinda Ardern, our Prime Minister. But that was when there was 1 death. Now there's 9. But there's been a definite flattening of the curve. You can see on the John Hopkins map, which is encouraging. But everyone's wondering when it will go down to level 3 from level 4 and what that will actually be like, because we actually skipped level 3 effectively. As far as I can tell, we just went from 2 to 4 suddenly, and that's when school closed. For me, as a teacher, I finished off the last couple of days of school, and then we went to remote learning, and I was just teaching through the internet. And then we've had holidays, so we've been out of sync with some other schools and my children's schools. So today was the first day that a lot of children started learning online, and as you can imagine, there was broadband problems and bandwidth issues up and down the country. Also, 4 days ago, the worldwide number for coronavirus deaths hit 100,000. So it's a strange time. It's interesting. It's scary. And I'm really glad that I have a job where I can work from home. I'm currently kind of doing 3 jobs, really. I'm dividing my time between 3 sort of things. But the main money earning issue is solved through me teaching online. So I feel sorry for people that don't have that luxury of being able to use the internet to continue their income. There's been lots of breaches all over the country, especially in the Wellington region, of a lot of people breaking or breaching the lockdown procedure and regulations. So that's been interesting to see it enforced and people given fines. But it is serious. The last message Jacinda Ardern gave to the country before the lockdown was basically act like you've got COVID-19. And there's been some silver linings. Honestly, there's been people that have noticed the lack of traffic, the lack of noise in their suburbs, a community feel to neighborhoods where people are just walking around, especially in my neighborhood. People are very accommodating and very nice, and everyone's getting very cordial to one another, which is brilliant. But I think there's a certain time when that will run out. So it's an interesting time to be around, and I'm very glad that I don't have to worry about my income, and I'm very glad I've got something to occupy my mind. So I'm still on holiday for a little bit longer, which is nice, and it's allowed me to set some things up and do a bit of writing, of course. So lockdown life has been very interesting. Every time I go to the supermarket, it feels bizarre, and I don't really know if I'm being over paranoid when I'm wearing my mask and I'm going out wearing the same pair of jeans, the same gloves and hat and everything else. I just feel kind of silly. My neighbor gave me this strange look today, as if to say, you really don't need to do that. Haven't you heard? From what little we know about what's occurring in communist China, there has been another increase, a bit of a surge in coronavirus cases since the lockdown and since the loosening on the lockdown procedures. So I think that people have very much underestimated the power and the tenacity of this virus. So hopefully I mean, I have no problem continuing this lockdown. I've actually found some parts of it have been very fortuitous for me, just for working around the home and spending more time with my kids and my partner and getting some things done around the house. I know that sounds very banal, but I really didn't have time to do that before. And I've been doing some more writing than I would normally. Of course, it's actually been the holidays, like I was saying before, so perhaps that's an unfair thing to say. I mean, I would be doing more writing during the holidays anyway. But yeah, there's been some positives to it, and I feel terrible for saying that, but I do not have a problem with continuing this lockdown. For me personally, I think other people should take it more seriously, because I hear of all these people that have broken the lockdown procedures, and just for everyone's case, for everyone's sake, I just wish that everyone could just please take it as seriously as we need to, so that we can get through this. So the holidays for me are coming to an end. I have only technically another 3 days of holiday, and then the weekend, and then back. Depends how you count, but I've kind of got 5 days of holiday left before I go back to teaching online using Zoom for my classes. So I'm very keen to continue my writing procedure. But I found something that's really helped me to write, and that is a procedure that's almost like exercise, where I just push forward onwards without really editing as I go. I'll go back later and edit it, but I can't do the Paul Auster kind of thing where he looks through a page and he composes it beautifully like a piece of music, and goes through and through and improves and improves and improves, and finally he gets this beautiful page. I just can't work like that. I just have to trudge onwards, because I kind of know where I'm going, hopefully. Please let me work this out. To be honest with you, like, I'm working out the smaller details as I go. I know the general story vaguely, but I am figuring out what people say and where they go and what happens to them on a personal, more detailed level as I'm writing. So I'm a bit of a Stephen King in that regard. I found it useful to just time myself and just see what happens after that time. I've also been doing some reading, and I finally finished Roots. This thick text, which, as you can see, the paragraphing is pretty intense and thick. There's no page breaks, there's no paragraph breaks, there's nothing. There's no chapters or anything, really. It's just sort of like, oh well, I guess there's chapters, but there's no sort of like page breaks, and there's just like solid blocks of text. So if it was normally formatted in today's modern formatting, like a Penguin book, it would be far more than 700 pages. It is a very interesting read. I'm really glad I've read this, and I hope that it's had some sort of impact on how I wrote and my concepts about races in the future in my universe. It certainly made me rethink American history. It certainly made me rethink about how you could write. The timing of it the pacing of it is a bit odd, because I'd say like that, it's like that much of a chunk is like all about the first, like more than half the book is about the very first character, who is a Mandinka African called Kunta Kinte, and he is taken on a slave ship, and the slave ship part is massive. Oh yeah, it's still Kunta Kinte here, and then the rest of the book very quickly, almost like it speeds up, like, because then his daughter has a son from the White Master, and then he becomes Chicken George, who's a chicken fighting man, and then they have a son who becomes a blacksmith, and then that blacksmith has a grandpa, and then that grandpa, and it speeds up towards the end. One thing I did like about it is that the last 3 chapters are about this guy himself, Alex Haley, actually talking about how he wrote it himself and how he researched it. And there's a massive acknowledgements at the beginning as well about all the people that he had to thank for the editing and researching. So is it a necessary book to read? I think if you are interested in race relations, it's sort of a prerequisite. I think if you're American, I think if you're Afro-American, I think if you're African, you have to read it. I found it interesting as a New Zealander. There's a lot of places that I don't understand. There's a lot of race relations that I kind of already knew about just from being a history teacher, but it certainly enlightened me on the details, and it made me definitely reconsider about how incredibly poorly those people were treated and how sinister the Atlantic slave trade was. And it's left a massive scar on the American psyche, which is at times tried to sometimes be put under the carpet a little bit. Other times it's fully celebrated in things like Black History Month, but I don't know, it's a very uneasy, difficult subject for Americans, and you can tell why. In terms of how it's written, there's definitely some places that just on a I hate to even mention it, but just in a purely flow-based, pace-based, and how the characters are developed is inconsistent. There's some parts that are like beautiful, like these little paragraphs, and other bits that are just trying to quickly tell you what's happening in American history. Like the slaves are talking about the Declaration of Independence, and then they're talking about the Civil War, and then they're talking about these things, and some of them, I think they're just like sort of almost like bookmarks to tell you exactly what time in American history this is occurring, because some of the slaves are not aware of what the date is. And yeah, I mean, there's some really cool parts, like Chicken George coming back from England, having been sold to someone in England, and then he comes back to find that his whole family has been sold to another farm, and he rides a horse and he rides it all night. There's some beautiful, highly heroic moments in here, people running away from their masters and getting caught and fighting back, and finally, of course, it's got a happy ending, of course, because the slaves after the Civil War and Gettysburg Address and all that kind of stuff, it's all in here, but it's very thick, it's very dense. I'm very, very glad I've read it now. I found that in amongst all this other stuff that's been happening with the lockdown, that I really needed to read something that was a little bit less intense, and I am not actually needing a whole lot of inspiration for science fiction at this point. So I decided to read a Bill Bryson book I picked up, which is about, it's called, what is it called? Notes from a Small Island. It's about England, and it's Bill Bryson's great. He wrote The Thunderbolt Kid, A Walk in the Woods, which is now a movie as well. I think his best and most famous one is probably A Short History of Everything, or SHOE. And yeah, it's a great book, but it's very, very dense. It's filled with A Short History of Everything. It's just got so much data. It's definitely his masterpiece. But in this, it's just sort of, it's very funny, and it's just sort of his observations of American culture versus English culture and how ridiculous both cultures are. And it's kind of funny. It's very lighthearted. He has a map of England, but it's all based on his living there. So basically, the idea of the book is that he's moving back to America, and he decides, having lived in England for nearly a decade and meeting his wife there and having one of their children there, I think, he goes back and he comes to England from Brittany, which is in France, and then sees the white cliffs of Dover, and then moves through and just makes these very funny observations of American culture versus English culture. It's very, very good, very light-hearted, and I think that's what I kind of needed. I'm actually racing through it, and I'll probably finish it within a month, because it's, I don't know, you have these kind of breaks, and I find that useful, because it's where I put the bookmark when I finish reading, whereas, like I said with Roots, the paragraphing is just so intense that you can already see what's happening in the next chapter, and then I just end up kind of reading, and then I'm like, no, that's too intense, and I actually need a break. So the paragraphing has actually made a difference. Also this, when people have a break here, and obviously when you have like paragraph breaks, or just the end of a chapter, it actually makes you have far more pages. And I think maybe Roots was just trying to save on paper. That did happen with a lot of publishing companies in the 70s and 60s. But modern publishing, especially during the 80s and 90s and 2000s, used a lot of paper. And now it's going digital, so who knows? I haven't really been taking it too seriously, but this is a Gore Vidal collection of essays. Gore Vidal is actually Al Gore's cousin, and he has some very, very astute observations of American culture. And I've been thinking a lot about American culture since the last chapter I wrote, which was based in the Midwest of America. I've kind of written as much as I need to get a good start on that. I'll finish it off later, hopefully. But there's one chapter especially that I've just bookmarked, which is about the wiretapping the Oval Office and all the different presidents that did that and everything else that was found, like not just Franklin Roosevelt, but also, of course, most famously Nixon as well, but also everyone before that, and what it was used for, how it got leaked. And it made me think of a really, really good show that I've just watched on Netflix, which was called Tricky Dick and the Man in Black. And that was a massive eye-opening. That I can't recommend that documentary enough. I don't even know why I watched it, and now I really want to bring President Nixon into my story as well somehow. I don't know what it is about that person. I don't know what it is about that man, but he is just so tragic and misunderstood and two-sided, and it's during the Vietnam War as well, which I am quasi-obsessed with, or was obsessed with, just as a instigation for a lot of different cultural change. The 60s just had it all, like the space race, the civil rights movement, the sexual revolution, psychedelic rock, the counterculture movement, the LSD, rainbow acid test book by Tom Wolfe, whatever the hell it's called, all of that, Woodstock, like the 60s had it all. And who's at the helm during this and slowly losing control and is just seen as this sinister, evil bastard? And it's Nixon, who unsuccessfully campaigned against John F. Kennedy. And John F. Kennedy and Nixon had the first presidential campaign election debate, and it was the first one on color television, and the general public could see straight away that they had the option of this pasty, uncomfortable, awkward man of Nixon's physicality, and versus this highly confident, the bravado of Kennedy. And it made me think, though, as well, that Kennedy is the old family, like he's old money, he's part of the elite, and Nixon wasn't. Nixon was someone who came up through the ranks. And I don't know, when people mention things like the Illuminati and all that kind of stuff, we're talking about like old money versus people that come through the ranks. And it's interesting how history has completely flipped it over on its head about certain things. There's certain presidents, and I don't think it's just a Democratic Republican thing. I think there's certain presidents that will go down as treacherous, lecherous, evil bastards, no matter what they do, no matter what they put through. And there's others that will be remembered for nothing but good things. It's strange how history will remember them. So anyway, I found it quite useful for writing for this last 3 weeks, just being very ordered and timing myself and just moving along and just seeing what will happen later and just trusting that I'll be able to edit later. I'm making a job for myself, but I can't really do the Paul Auster kind of thing. So what I'm writing now is I've returned back to the big story about my main character, who is Malachi, who is a god of Eden, and his new wife called Awen, who is also a god of Eden, but from a different system. There's only 2 main systems, Messo and Sahain. Sahain was the first one. It's where the first 6 consciousness emerged, and where the temples that basically work like their original engines or memory banks or their server computers were first there, and now they're kind of shrines, but they're unnecessary because everything's been uploaded to the cloud of the orb. So there's no need for those shrines anymore, but all 6 of them are found inside Sahain, and Sahain is really the crucible of the culture that is occurring inside of my story. So it's very old-fashioned and more traditional, and it's a bit grayer, and I'm kind of using that concept to base a lot of the architecture and the culture just in general in terms based on sort of Europe rather than the United States and the New World. And in opposition to that, Malachi, who is the main character, or the main character of the gods in my story, comes from Messo, which is kind of like a new world, and it's all money obsessed and more and less traditional, more liberal and less obsessed with with history. But it's more obsessed only with money and what people are doing now and the blessed now and all these other things. So they're coming from two different cultures, and they get together, and I have written some chapters that make these two characters meet one another, but I'm finding it hard to kind of like bulk it out, and I've decided to concentrate on when they've escaped together, because they find out that they're going to be basically consumed when they reach a certain age. People don't use ages, they use cycles, which is basically a day, but they work out that no gods exist beyond a particular age, and they disappear basically, and they fall from grace, and they don't have a congregation anymore. So between each other, they secretly, without letting the tiny little cherubs that are constantly buzzing around them, recording everything and broadcasting it to all of their followers all over Eden and beyond Eden, that they are going to escape. And this is done through Awen telling Malachi that she's actually not in love with him, and that she wishes to escape with him. By this stage, Malachi has also sustained an injury to the head, which allows him to detect magnetic fields, and he feels a kind of buzzing in his teeth in the back of his head when a magnetic field comes close to him. And that is what is emanated from synthetic people, or sins. So he can tell if someone is real or not, and he can also tell if they're coming near him. It's quite painful to begin with, and then he learns to control his power. But it's all sustained through a head injury that he gets. People hear about it, or the rumor goes around that he has this power, and then that is when he's approached by Awen. And he finds out later that that is why Awen has specifically sought his hand in marriage, and she proposes to him because he will allow her to escape through using his power. And the other thing that she knows about him is that he's a purveyor and a collector of historical artifacts and archaic objects. So he knows about the old world, so he will be able to guide her through the abandoned cities beyond Messo, which are far older, that have contracted as some sort of virus has been spread between the two systems. So they escape, and that's the chapter that I'm writing right now. And I wanted to do some research about it, and I started looking back at my notes about the French Revolution and Robespierre and Napoleon and Louis XVI and all these kinds of things, and the Three Estates. And it really, I'm glad I've come back to this chapter, because basically my form of my story is basically like a very, very skinny trunk with a whole lot of stories coming off it. And I've been concentrating on these other stories, like the American story, and now I started writing something about Nixon, like I was saying before, and I've written all these other chapters that are actually not part of the main story, which is about Malachi and Awen and their complex relationship. So I keep coming back to that, and I found it really useful to just time myself and just get on with it. So they escape, and they're out in this abandoned city, and of course they don't call it a city, they think it's like this old sort of system, but it's far less vertical than the system of Messo or Sahain that they're used to, because systems are very much sort of like basically like needle-like structures to have less of an impact on the planet and to create these beautiful vistas and views, but people live on top of one another based on their hierarchy, because it's all about hierarchy, and the whole story is really about hierarchy and commenting on it. But everything I write ever has tried to be a reflection on what's occurring right now in the world, and I have been influenced by the COVID-19 outbreak, you know, by that sort of that concept of some sort of outbreak making cities contract and put gates around ever increasingly smaller areas and then building upwards. And you find this in histories relating to the Black Plague and throughout the 30 Years' War in Europe, which is a kind of a time in history that I'm sort of obsessed with as well. There's lots of times in history I'm obsessed with. Vietnam War, 30 Years' War, Sea War as a continuing topic. But never mind. Another book I started reading was this, Keystone by Peter Lovesey, and it was really interesting because it's all about 1915 silent movie era. I'm just been reading it sort of just every now and again, but it's kind of hard boiled. I don't even know when it was written. It was written in the 80s, early 80s, but it's sort of like a hard boiled whodunit, but it's based in 1915, and it made me think of all those characters and massive actors at the time, like, I don't know, Buster Keaton and Lillian Gish and Charlie Chaplin and Mary Maurice and all of these silent movie actors. And it got me thinking about celebrityhood and the impact of who these actors are and how a single actor, even in the pre-1920s, could make or break a movie. And these massive Hollywood moguls and having this massive monopoly within the silver screen era or pre-silver screen era of Hollywood. These actors just got so much push and pull, and they can have so much of a say on what is occurring in the film, like what scenes they're going to do, and they read the scripts and they change the scripts. They've just got so much influence on what actually happened, and it's even though it's a whodunit and it's very cliche, but it just got me thinking, because I've been looking a lot about the impact of celebrityhood, celebrity worship syndrome, and it's really got me thinking. And it's been very useful for this chapter because that I've been trying to bulk up, because I want to return back to the main trunk of my story, which is about Malachi and A1. So celebrityhood and the impact of celebrities in this day and age, assisted by social media like Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and YouTube, they all are about trying to pull people into a particular world and a type of aesthetic that celebrity represents, whether it's a rock and roll lifestyle and being hell-bent and fast and loose and crazy, or incredibly meditative and centered and calm, or sporty and active, or luxurious, or crazy, or everything in between, and you find these particular celebrities that represent something, and I can understand why it's difficult for these people to change. You look back at some amazing musicians of the past, and you see they fall into two camps of people that just continue to do the same thing, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And musically, I'm talking about bands like, I don't know, AC/DC, that just basically do the same album, and people love them for it. But I think it's more brave to think of those people, the chameleons that continue to change, like Madonna and Bowie. Every single album is different. Every single character is different, from Spiders from Mars to Aladdin Sane to beyond. And every single time they're reinventing themselves. And I think that when I look at modern day, and when I mean modern day, I mean like 2020 sort of pop stars, they're not aware of what's occurred in the past and how important it is to change gradually, because you do push yourself into a square where you define yourself and what your aesthetic is. But no one stays the same age forever. No one's political outview stays the same. You do develop, you do change as you grow older. Everyone starts their life being far more liberal than they'll end up. It's just a matter of I don't want to make it seem like it's a building maturity. It's more about like becoming realistic, because you're idealistic when you're young and you think that everyone can get along, and you find out that the devil is in the details and people can't do it in quite that way that you thought that they could. And there's some annoying things about humanity that make it impossible for us all to get along without necessary conflict, and it's hard to describe and to explain to children, and you don't want to crush that individualistic idealism in them, because you want them to have really good ethics and you want them to have great values, but you also can't help but feel as if you need to say some things with a giant asterisk, like a giant footnote at the end. By the way, honey, this doesn't always work because there's this thing called the stock market. There's a thing called the economy. People need to have jobs so they can do that. No, we can't do that. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a free market. Why do we need a free market? Well, some countries didn't have a free market, and it becomes this very confusing conversation that I don't actually have any of the answers to, and I don't think anyone does. We're just all trying to figure it out. But when I look at Kanye and Kim Kardashian, KKK, when I look at Kanye West, for example, he is very much encouraging that particular type of worship that I'm trying to criticize in the book. The same thing with Kim Kardashian. She's not really representing anything but herself, and she doesn't really produce anything by herself. You're rich and famous for being famous. It's like, but what do you produce? What do you contribute? What do you make? And I think that's more true with Kim Kardashian, because she is an influencer. But where did it start? It's a very funny road to get on. She was basically the equivalent of a princess. Anyway, I was doing some research about one of my new favorite bands, which is Swans, and if you haven't heard of Swans, you should definitely check that band out. Amazing band. But something came up in the search engine about this woman called Teal Swan, and Teal Swan is a very interesting celebrity indeed. She is a self-help revolutionary. I forget what her technical term is, but it's very, very strange. She's been labelled as someone who has encouraged suicide in some people, and some people have committed suicide that have been part of her cult-like status. She has thousands of followers, popular and influential over the internet, but this actually moves beyond just being famous on the internet, because she fills conference rooms where she will talk and discuss, but I'm not really sure what she's doing, but she's guiding people, I guess. But and then I kind of went down the rabbit hole, as I do, about conspiracy theories about COVID-19. The Simpsons episodes that foretold COVID-19, which is a really funny Marge episode. I love me a good conspiracy theory, I have to say. But anyway, I was rabbit holing on the internet and looking for Swan's music, and I happened upon this woman called Teal Swan, and she is definitely going to be an inspiration for my book as a god of Eden. And I think what I'm going to base her off is I'm basically going to use Teal Swan as an influence for a character who I haven't written about much yet, called Titania. And Titania comes from, A Midsummer's Night Dream as Queen of the Fairies, and she's also in one of my favorite comic books of all time called The Sandman, which unfortunately was going to be a Gordon Levitt movie, but he pulled out at the last minute. But it's owned by DC, so one day there will be a film of that. But that's one of my favorite comic books, and Titania's mentioned a couple of times in that. I love the way that she's sort of mentioned in other chapters, but you don't see her for many for whole books. But she's hinted at kind of like a rumor, and that's what I want to do with this character, but kind of in a Teal Swan way. She's very influential, slightly sadistic, but seems beautiful and helpful, but is actually in some way very evil. So anyway, in my rabbit holing research for The Gods of Eden, which I'm currently writing right now, I came upon some very interesting past celebrities that have had people that have come to a sticky end. One is Christina Grimmie, who is quite a recent influencer on social media and contemporary life, and I found her story disturbing and fascinating, and again it went back to some of my research about celebrity worship syndrome and how people can get sort of obsessed about a particular person and then take their life. And the same is true with people that, the people that killed John Lennon and the Manson family. Another is Selena Quintanilla Perez, who was a 90s Latin pop star, and she was killed by her her manager, and she came to a weird sticky end as well. And Sharon Tate from the 60s as well, who was killed by the Manson family. And even though it's a little bit depressing to look at these stories, I think there's something to be gained from being very critical of the fandom that followed them and the influence that they had over culture. And also I kind of did a little bit of research in the Sahain fans of Korea, who just go batshit crazy for K-pop, and these people that basically obsess about their musicians. I mean, this is nothing new. I mean, fans, fanatics, it's all the same word. It also came up in the same sort of like research when I was doing Sasaeng, which was the hikikomori, and that is a Japanese name for usually men, but it can be for anyone, people that live in Japan that don't actually leave their bedrooms for many, many years for any reason whatsoever, and they basically have a job that they have on the internet to fuel their lifestyle, and they have food delivered, and they live basically within a bubble of their own apartment completely by themselves. Of course, now I think it's 540,000 Japanese hikikomori will now have a very different lifestyle under COVID-19 lockdown, because they cannot have food delivered anymore, so they're going to have some other lifestyle change. So anyway, like usual, I've been writing, I've been researching, I've been surviving, and that's what's happened so far. So I hope to finish off a lot of these chapters that I've kind of half begun. I've half begun one on America in the 90s. I've half begun a sort of a President Nixon one, but I'm going to put those to the side now. I'm going to go back to the main story, the main point of this whole book, which is about a god of Eden called Malachi. And the reason why he is the main character is that I do see myself in him a little bit. He is a misunderstood, bit of a dark horse, bit of a mysterious man interested in intrigue and archaic technology. If he doesn't collect vinyl, but if he was a music fan, he would. He collects books, but he doesn't know how to read. That's his big dark secret. And yeah, he's the dark horse, and he plays chess, and he thinks he's fantastic. But underneath that, he's very fragile. He has incredible flaws that he doesn't want anyone to know about. He's very proud, secretly self-critical. So he's a complex character, which is what I needed. And he thinks he falls in love with Awen, and Awen is actually just using him for his magnetic field perception so that she can use him to escape from Messo and from the systems in general. The other thing about Malachi is that he is someone who is living inside of a gilded cage. He is basically he's a god of Eden, so he's spoilt. And sometimes I feel my own existence. I feel very, very lucky to live in New Zealand, and very lucky with all sorts of things in my life. I feel very blessed. It makes me realize sometimes that my own outlook is flavored by my privileges that I am dimly aware of. And I say dimly because, having read a book like Roots, I know that history has been written by the winners. I think it's the last paragraph actually in that book that Alex Haley says is that I hope this book can join in the conversation that normally history is written by the winners of this world. And so I'm more and more aware of the tragedies, atrocities of the past. And I am slowly beginning to be aware of my own position in that history and the privileges that I enjoy. And so I am aware that I am a very lucky man. And the same sort of occurs for Malachi. Malachi is a person who is aware of his privilege. He wants to be a complex character. He wants to be mysterious and seen as some sort of intelligent, cultured person. And I suppose I do as well. I want to be recognized as a writer, and I want to be recognized as an interesting individual. But him and I, as people, he's a character, I know, but sometimes it helps to think of my characters as real people. We both have our failings and our insecurities and our frailties. So yeah, that wraps it up. That I'm very glad to just be continuing on. I'm very lucky to have a way of making money during the lockdown. I'm not finding it that hard to live. I'm kind of half enjoying it. I am a bit of a hermit at the best of times, although I am missing having band practices and seeing my friends and going out for a beer. But what can I say? It's just what we got to do right now. So stay safe, everyone. I hope everyone is able to find peace and harmony within this strange circumstance.